Hello, Sonoma County. I'm Susan Gorin, Chair of the Sonoma County Board of Supervisors, and this is a great opportunity to listen in on 5 questions with Susan. I'm so honored and privileged to interview this morning Alegría De La Cruz, our new Interim Equity Officer for the county. And I'm very excited, and you will be too, about the important work that she's about ready to start on. So, Alegría, let's talk about what the Office of Equity is and what is your first goal, your most immediate goal that you want to accomplish?
I think the first and most immediate goal that needs to be accomplished is really defining what the Office of Equity is for the County of Sonoma. So the thing that's beautiful about a conversation about equity is that it's not, here, take a binder, this is the path to equity in your community. It's really about having a process that helps our community define what that means for itself and really looks at what are the big areas of opportunity and how can we resource some of those opportunities in a way that will be effective to achieve equity. I think, it's really important for us to understand together a shared definition of what equity means. And to me, equity is both a process by which we are elevating voices of those who are impacted by our policies and our decision making and have been for many generations, that results in an outcome whereby you can't tell the difference of how somebody comes out of a process or is, by how they are impacted by a policy due to their race, ethnicity, gender, wealth, health. And so it really looks at kind of this ability to see things from 2 sides, both the process when you're in the middle of creating the policy or implementing the policy and how you investigate the impact of those policies, and then really also looking at the outcome of those policies.
Thank you, Supervisor Gore, for taking on the task of speaking with our underrepresented communities in Sonoma County about communication and COVID, how we actually are impacted and perhaps disproportionately impacted by COVID. But from your perspective, we are totally consumed with the pandemic, but why is it important to prioritize equity now?
Right. So we know, sadly, we've learned some lessons after having been through a number of disasters in our community. We know what happens after a disaster. And essentially what happens is that our inequities grow deeper. And one thing that's really critical for us to recognize and to realize is the ways in which inequities are not just about, they don't just hurt the folks who are actually subject to the inequities. They actually make an entire community poorer, less healthy, less connected. And so it's really critical now more than ever to focus on questions of equity and how to achieve them during a pandemic. I was reflecting on something that our director of the Department of Emergency Management said that is definitely reflective of my experience serving in our emergency operations center, that during a pandemic or during an emergency, there is a culture that is created in the middle of that emergency of the staff and the folks who are working 24/7 around it. And there's an urgency to that work. And so there's a very quick process of developing new relationships, new trust, new ways of doing things, new efficiencies, new areas of focus. And that it doesn't surprise me that the county really made this critical shift to centering equity and finding ways to talk about equity in the middle of a disaster, because it's actually a very important, critical moment of opportunity for us to look at how do we infuse the culture of our service provision and the way in which we're responding to this disaster with equity in the center. And because we're in the middle of an emergency, we have an ability to really accelerate the ways in which we change and recenter folks who most need us to do that. I would say the other thing that really centering equity in this moment during a pandemic does is it allows us to be a lot more focused, a lot more, we're working with a scalpel and not with a hammer. We're able to use resources, scarce resources, in a much more focused and kind of critically directed way to look at who is most impacted and why, and how can we address that specific need. And so I think for those folks who are wondering, like, why would you go, make this really large investment of funds at a time when funds are scarce and people really need in a different kind of a way, including at the county? I really think that what I'm seeing this as a challenge is to make sure that the Office of Equity is providing a critical resource to departments to figure out how to be much more focused in what it is that we're doing. So we may not need to create and spin up huge new programs. We may need to say, here's a pipe that needs to be welded together in order to deliver services more effectively and more efficiently to the community that's most impacted. And so I really see this also as allowing us to be more nimble, more focused, more flexible, and ultimately more efficient.
The Office of Equity didn't just simply pop up out of the pandemic. It really has been growing within the county as the major employer for Sonoma County. Great employee and employee groups have come together over the last couple of years and recognized that we need to support and emphasize the efforts of the county as an organization to recognize the disparities and the inequalities within our own organization. But how will this office not only benefit the county as a major employer, but the community as a whole, and especially those who've been disenfranchised in our county?
Yeah. So I really see the office as having two critical foci. One is internal, and recognizing that for those of us who come from those communities that we serve, who have also been disenfranchised, that there are ways in which our service as bilingual, bicultural employees has also been not necessarily elevated in quite the way that it needs to be. So there's a really important effort right now moving through the County of Sonoma. It's called SoCo Learn. It's the Latinx Employee Resource Network, and that group of folks really popped up as a result of being tapped and called on during every disaster that we've been through, because we are bilingual and bicultural and we're critical to the county's emergency response. And we realized that, we would pop up during these times of emergency, and then it would kind of like go back to business as usual. And what became very clear in the course of continuing to work together was, one, we're much stronger when we're connected and when we're able to continue doing that important bilingual, bicultural, that culturally responsive work, not only in times of disaster, but also in our day-to-day work. I would say at the same time, the county really dedicated itself to an effort that has now turned into something called SoCo Real, so the Racial Equity Alliance for Leadership. And that group of folks have gone through about 2 years of training with a government organization called GARE to really kind of build new muscles and new understanding about both the responsibility that government has long played in creating situations that result in disenfranchisement and disconnection between communities of color and poor communities for generations now. And I think really importantly, what is the work that can be done to be different and to recognize that we have responsibility for healing those harms as government now today. And so I think that kind of internal and external focus is critical to a successful Office of Equity popping up. And I think that when we are able to elevate the voices of those who truly serve and who are looking at how to responsibly serve those members of our community who have been disconnected for a long time due to the way that we work, we are also really making sure that we are delivering those services in a better, clearer, more accessible ways to the folks who most need them. And as I mentioned at the outset, when our most vulnerable community members do better, we all do better. When we are less poor, when we are healthier, in every single part of our community as a whole will rise. And so I think it's really important to recognize the ways in which centering equity again, mean that everybody is better off in the end.
Well, Alegría, you are inspiring to listen to, but where do you find your source of inspiration?
So I come from a very special family. I was raised by organizers and by farm worker organizers and people who found their meaning in recognizing that many of the solutions to the challenges that we were seeing every day in our lives as farm workers actually already existed in our community. And what we really needed to do was listen and then elevate those solutions that were coming out of the people that were, that were looking for something different and better. So on a daily basis, I find my inspiration in the people that we serve, and in really listening to their excellent ideas, their recognition of what's not working for them, and trying to really find ways to, how do I pull those threads through the, challenging bureaucratic channels of government so that we can get something done together. And so I find inspiration every day in the folks that we serve, and I find inspiration every day and in the wonderful people that I work with at the county. I think that once you start listening to people's good ideas and you start figuring out ways to unlock them getting done, there's something that's really inspirational about being productive in that way. And really, I find inspiration in my community and the folks that help me to do this work. I think it's really critical to know that none of this is on one person, none of this is on one office, that this is something that we all share together. And to me, that's where I find the deepest inspiration is in continuing to exist in those places that are truly collaborative, that are about kind of sharing responsibility and power and the privilege and the honor to do this work of public service. And so I think I find inspiration in pretty much everywhere that I look, and that that perspective is important, I think, to continue being positive and continue finding ways to move forward through some of these difficult challenges.
I came of age in the 1960s, early 70s, and it was a period of incredible unrest with so many social movements and the Vietnam War galvanizing communities to action, to change, and to hope for change. And I was hopeful that through collaborative action, through community conversations, that we would find change, and we find ourselves in a period of unrest as well, recognizing the challenges that we see, Black Lives Matter, and the inequalities that you've articulated. Is there hope? Are we going to move forward? How so? Where do you find your hope?
I find my hope in young people. I feel like, young people in the 60s, those were my parents, who were so hopeful and so inspired and did effect real change. I want to remind folks every day that, many of us would not have been in higher education, would not have had the privilege of, being educated in some of the best universities in the country. And it's still too few of us who have had the privilege of doing that. But that is a direct result of many of those challenges and those battles that were fought in the, in times before I came. And so we stand on those shoulders every day, recognizing that that was, the important work of young people who were very, very hopeful. And so I see that same generation of people being so instrumental in this time of change. And I think if we can really elevate the voices of those young people who see both the challenges of our current federal administration and the ways in which those policies have impacted us in negative ways, if we look at broken immigration systems, and we see people who are truly dreaming, I find my hope and in listening to those voices of people who are no longer accepting silence, no longer who are pushing back against the attempts to silence them. And so I that gives me just amazing amounts of hope. I'm so moved, for example, by the new young people who are joining the Sonoma County Junior Human Rights Commission, and who are really taking up that important work, moving forward into a new generation. Those kids have been the ones who have continued leading nonviolent, peaceful protests, pushing back against violence, making sure that people who come to those places are not there to get in trouble or are not there to cause harm to our communities. In fact, I really hear that group of people saying that what they want is to shine a light into a different place, and where light needs to be, and that those actions and what our young people are doing in this country right now gives me hope every day.
And I would agree with you. It has been young people throughout the generations yearning for a better future, better lives. And you're right. I love the fact that you talked about raising those voices up so that they could be heard, while blending with the voices of some of us who have been there and learned and could provide some wisdom and guidance and support for young folks across the planet concerned about climate change, social justice, environmental justice, all of us coming together, celebrating diversity. And it's going to be so much fun and enjoyable for me to watch you help evolve this office and eventually reach out to the two commissions, the Commission on the Status of Women, the Commission on Human Rights, because the work that we need to do collectively cannot be done by one person or a couple of people. It has to be community-wide. And so I'm so grateful that you've taken on this task to work with us to help spread that message. Thank you for your time this morning. Thank you to our residents for tuning in on this interview. For more information about COVID-19, please visit socoemergency.org or call our information hotline 211. See you next time.